Jeff is General Counsel and Director of Legislative Affairs at ISDA. I will tell you, Jeff has dived headfirst into this industry and has taken the time to learn it. He's a big advocate for us. If you have questions, make sure you hound him the whole day. Okay? Thanks, Jeff, for being here.
Thanks, Justin. Appreciate it. Now I just got remarks on.
Okay. Just close that. Maybe.
Perfect. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Morning. Good to see everybody. Thanks for having me. Jeff Cummins, Counsel and Legislative Director for the Indiana State Department of Ag. If anybody wants to time me, feel free. I don't have, all I've got is a phone with me. One of the things I want to do before we get into some hemp stuff is I never take for granted that folks actually understand how we are structured as a department relative to some of our counterpart state departments of ag around the country. So whereas in a typical Department of Ag, you might have all regulatory functions of agriculture in one place, with us, you don't have that. We have, by statute, an economic development focus, mission, and vision. So to support agriculture in every way we can, including new and burgeoning industries that develop. And so that's kind of what we're doing with hemp as well. So think about livestock. IDEM regulates confined feeding operations. Board of Animal Health has meat, poultry, dairy inspections. Department of Health would have food and food safety. Office of State Chemist, feed, seed, pesticides, and fertilizers. So those would all typically be housed in a Department of Ag in another state, but there are a handful across the country that are situated as we are, sort of disparate and spread out. Occasionally that can seem a little clunky or disorganized, but we think that it gives the regulated community a more direct and probably more emphasized impact and effect and relationship with their regulators. So the only regulatory function we have in our department is we license people who buy grain and store it for hire, the Indiana Grain Buyers and Warehouse Licensing Agency. And so that's really the only regulatory function we perform. Other than that, we have policy advocacy, Division of Soil Conservation, Indiana FFA Association, communications, and then again that economic development piece, under which would be things like Indiana Grown. And I believe we've got some members of the hemp industry and part of that as a part of that group, which has about 4 staff now and roughly 1,500 members. So we're really seeing a continued robustness in that program and a lot of interest as it relates to supporting and marketing small businesses, local businesses. And so we're really excited about what Indiana Grown's been able to do for a lot of those folks. We also have international trade as a piece of that, so helping small, medium enterprises find their way abroad. We spend quite a bit of time there, and so that would be kind of the structure and focus of the economic development team, although the bulk of our staff is in that Division of Soil Conservation. So that's a little bit about us. Always like to lay that groundwork, a little framework and understanding for what we do and don't do. Oftentimes we're asked regulatory questions that we are happy to work on and more than involved in, but not always the final decision maker of those outcomes. So hemp, what has our experience been with hemp? What have we worked on and what advice do we have? Well, I'll share some things that I think are important for folks in the industry to know. I probably won't say anything that widens your eyes or makes your hair stand on end, but these are kind of some basic things that I think we've discovered. And as we're asked to help connect growers to processors, as we're asked to help this market develop, we're asked to give advice and counsel on some things. And so here's a little bit about what we've been saying. First of all, you've got to know the Office of State Chemist. Know them, learn them, love them. They're going to help you, coach you, guide you the whole way from A to Z on production. Know those guys, but develop a relationship with them, understand the regulations, understand how to comply, understand the rules that they have to abide by, because they're going to be just as big a partner as we might be on the economic development side. Genuinely and seriously, your regulators in this state across all of ag are some of your best advocates. And where they're not, we'll go find and have a conversation with them and talk to them about what we can be doing better to partner. But State Chemist's office is terrific, and they're going to be just as big a partner in this. So know them and get to know them really well. Number 2, you've got to think about seed supply. And this isn't just going to be about can you get any. It's going to be about reliability. And so I think maybe just anecdotally, what we've seen with some of the complaints or concerns we've heard on testing method, whether the sample size or what's done in the lab, a lot of that can be resolved by what you do on genetics. And so you've got to think about seed supply, where you're going to get it, where you're going to source it from, and will you have enough. But you've got to think about, will it be reliable? will be something you can take out of the field and go to market with. And in many cases, it won't be. And so you've got to think about what that means for your supply and then compliance on the back end. So as folks have called and said, we're concerned about total THC testing. Well, first of all, USDA rule says we have to do it that way. So we're going to try to do it that way. But if you're complaining about the testing, you're already in a bad spot. It probably could have been solved with the genetics. And so think about your supply, think about your source, and think about the reliability. And next, think about your market. So you get the genetics, you get a good supply, you've got something grown, you're ready to harvest, it passed the test, and you're going to go to market. Who are you going to send it to? This isn't a commoditized product. At least not today anyway. Maybe it will be at some point, but it's not today. So you've got to think about your endpoint. Who's going to take it? Are they licensed? Are they reputable? So the other piece of this where I think we've seen concerns is even if you've got a contract in place, you've got to make sure that people are able to fulfill it. When you get that product to market, are they going to take it and are they going to pay you? And this is kind of a regulatory question too. Who's watching those folks? Who's making sure that they will honor their contracts and honor their obligations to folks that they contract with? Well, not really anybody right now. Again, on the grain buyers warehouse licensing side, we get questions on whether hemp should be involved in that. Can you license these firms who will buy just like you would grain? Well, maybe, but we don't today. We don't have the authority to do anything with folks who don't honor their contracts. And so as much as it's an economic development concern for you to find that market and find that outlet, you've also got to make sure it's going to be reliable and available at the time you go to it. So you're going to have to do some homework, do some research, meet with these folks, understand their business model, understand a little bit about their solvency and history, because there's really nobody else that can tell you that right now, for the most part, in the state of Indiana from a regulatory standpoint. We don't have audit and licensing authority over those firms. We do on grain buyers and grain elevators and warehouses, but we don't have that authority. Doesn't extend to hemp right now. So the question becomes, well, couldn't you modify that grain law to include hemp? Well, maybe, but again, that's something we have to go to the legislature and do. And the other hiccup with that is that there's the Indiana Grain Indemnity Fund, which covers farmers for obligations that they're owed from these elevators if we fail them. So if we take a licensee off the market and say, you can't do business, you're not solvent, you're not meeting our standards, the indemnity fund will pay them for whatever that firm doesn't have the money to pay them out of the grain obligations. So that's funded by corn and soybeans and wheat and other things. And so to stick hemp in there, you might say, well, we filled this coffer and it's our money. So we're a little concerned about now modifying these grain laws to include hemp. So we've got to resolve that issue too, because I think there's a lot of merit to including hemp in the way it's bought and sold right now in that grain protection law, but there's a lot of complications that come with it. So we've got to think that through as well from a regulatory standpoint. So find your market and make sure you've got a contract in place, but make sure the firm you're doing business with is reputable. So that's going to be the other key piece. Let me touch on USDA rules as well, and then I'll kind of stop there and maybe take some questions. So I think the good news is, and it's not perfect, but I think the good news is that from a big picture, broad stroke standpoint, the interim rule released by USDA is pretty close to what we're doing. Take a representative sample, use total THC testing, understand location and GPS coordinates of fields, have inspections, have violations and compliance protocols, have a disposal mechanism and things like that. We've got sort of the big picture, I think, infrastructure to be compliant with that program. Where might we run into a tripwire? It's possible that our statute, or at least I can imagine USDA being concerned with the diversionary language of our statute that says, let's say you're growing CBD, for instance, and it's got too much THC, we will allow you, if you find a willing processor under state law, to send that to industrial uses, if you can find somebody to take it. I'm not sure they will, because I don't know if a fiber company will have use for a CBD plant material. That's up to them. I don't really know necessarily what their needs will be. But I can imagine USDA saying, that's a little too flexible. We probably can't go there. And so do we have to make an adjustment in state law and in that statute to be compliant with USDA? I think they'd like a lot of what we're doing already. And to the extent that we think they're too stringent or that we'd like to do something a little different, it really won't matter. Because if our plan's not approved, it defers to their plan anyway. So one of the things that comes up is, well, they've really got this sort of harsh limit at 0.5. You're sort of above 0.5, and it's a negligent violation. 3 of those over 5 years, I think, get you banned for another 5. Maybe Justin, correct me on that. I think I got close there. You say, well, can't we have some flexibility? What if it can be sold to a non-consumable use? Well, they may not care, and they may find that, well, you're outside the limit, and we just can't go there. So I will tell you that the state of Indiana has submitted not comments directly to USDA, but through our national organization, the National Association of State Departments of Ag, addressing some concerns. One of which is maybe that variance harshness. Couldn't we have a little more flexibility there, particularly if it's going to go to a non-consumable use? Testing of every field. I just don't know that we have the manpower. It gets really difficult to test every field. And we're looking right now, that's the rule, and we're reading the guidance, and maybe Dr. Waltz can speak to this a little better than I, but the guidance is pretty funky too. I'm not sure the guidance matches what the rule says in terms of gathering a representative sample, and then they want us to do it for every field. So the result of that is across the nation, some states are saying, well, this seems really complicated. I'm not sure we have the money or manpower. Why don't we just sit back and maybe let USDA handle this? Okay, that's one option, and maybe that'll work, but it's interesting to me that they've got these stringent standards in place, and I'll second Justin's note on comments. You've got to make comments. But they've got these stringent standards in place that might incentivize states to just let USDA do the work, but USDA is not charging a fee. So how in the hell are they going to pay to go into every state that doesn't develop a program and test every field? I just don't think it's feasible. I'm not sure that's going to stay that way, and if it does, it's going to be really complicated for USDA as states go, well, we don't have the manpower, and by the way, it's cheaper with you because you're not charging anybody. So there's a little bit of a strange incentive there in terms of what states might do. So what's the result of that? When we were examining some other federal rules that were coming down the line on food safety a couple years ago, it was sort of the same model. FDA said, you guys can do it or we will. Great, thanks, we'll take it. So what does that mean for federal programs if they're going to run your state operation? Well, it probably means they won't be here all the time, and when they are, it's going to be fast and furious, and they're just out to get you. I probably shouldn't even really say that, because our friends at USDA have been good partners on this, but I'm telling you, I don't know how they'll have the manpower or the money to do this unless it's that way. Unless they come in on an occasion and just catch bad guys or anybody they think is a bad guy. So I think states have an obligation here to try to find a way to get this right, and we are. We're working very closely with the governor's office, state police, Dr. Waltz and his team at State Chemist, Don Robinson, and those folks, and the industry. Midwest Hemp Council has been a great partner for us, and Farm Bureau as well. But we've got to coordinate and get this right. I think a lot of states have to get this right, because I'm not sure USDA will be able to do this the right way that's going to be good for farmers and good for the industry. So probably some comments I shouldn't have made, but there you have it. Happy to take questions. Okay, well, I think Dr.
What are the odds USDA will lift it to 1% at this point?
I don't know. I don't know what the question is, what are the odds that they lift the THC level to 1%? I think that's probably a pretty good number that would provide a lot of flexibility, but they are hewing very closely to the statute in terms of that 0.3 limit. They have really narrowed the window of flexibility beyond that 0.3 THC. So unless there's some statutory flexibility that USDA believes they can cling to allow that flexibility, I suspect that they won't. Because in the calls we've had with them after this rule was released, I mean, they are hewing very closely to that statute. Yes, ma'am.
But we can aim high and potentially they meet us somewhere in the middle.
Sure, aim high and maybe they come down to meet us somewhere in the middle. I think that's right, and I think that's why the comments from folks are going to be really important. Particularly, and I don't know what's on Justin's list there, but I think that percentage flexibility and the testing of every field. I mean, we could do a random sample, get a representative sample of every random sample of fields and probably be okay. They're going to get into some real cost and labor overruns to do it otherwise. Okay, thanks.